Hello, everyone. Welcome to Now
Yeah,
That's
I'm on.
Debatable. I am your host, Fantastic Prasad. I am joined here today with my co host, Geocentric Skeptic. We are going to have a little bit of an audio delay, unfortunately, but if you call in, please be aware of that. Please mute your stream. That way we can kind of pay attention to you and hear you instead of the stream lag in the background. Geo, are you with me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can copy.
Perfect. So, of course, today we're going to be talking about can the Christian God of the Bible, or pretty much any God. We're going to be a little more generic with the first couple of shows until we get our feet wet and get this under, get a little viewers under our feet. If we can be a little more open to our our viewers and our debaters if they want to call in to pretty much any god, but both Geo and I are very familiar with the Christian God, which is why we wanted to be a little more specific. But we're open if you want to call in and basically talk about any God and talk about that versus science and whether they can be compatible or not. So if you join us, there's a chat there on the right. It should pop up on the screen if you say anything. We'd love to hear from you. We'd also love just to kind of get people's perspective if they'd like to call in. With that in mind, we'll do Q and A's in chat. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them there. And we're going to tackle a few topics that I have posted over here on one of our pages that I'm going to bring up here in just a moment. Gio, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, um, I think you said it all perfectly, man.
Perfect. So the goal is obviously to have a very civil debate. We do not want to step on anyone's toes. We're not trying to insult anyone. We're not trying to insult anyone's intelligence. And I don't think either of us really mind what you believe as a person. However, we may challenge that belief, and we are open to having our beliefs challenged. So, with that in mind, I think we're just going to jump right into our main page here and go into some of the contested points. We're going to open up our call in option. So, if you call that number, you're actually going to come live on the air with us and we'll be able to talk with you, chat with you, ask questions, answer questions, and kind of go from there. I have some basic overviews, and there's a lot more in depth things that we can go into here. And that's something that Gio and I do pretty regularly on our own time. So we thought we'd kind of bring it out to the world and see if anybody would like to join us and voice their own opinion. So there's a few major points here on the left, and I'll let Geo choose whichever one we want to tackle first. But in short, animal creation, which is heavily mentioned in Genesis in the Bible, a global flood, which is Genesis chapter 8 as well. Um, there's a pretty big misconception from a lot of biblical scholars and a lot of people that we know in the Christian and other spiritual communities that have a misconception of everything from nothing. If
Yeah,
you have issues with
thanks for that.
everything from nothing, please feel free to voice those. We'd like to address those. Naturally occurring versus supernatural and miraculous events, things like that that are in the Bible that need to be accounted for, um, that have to be questioned and whatnot. And then the last, of course, is I don't want to sound too biased, but essentially squashing curiosity versus constantly seeking better understanding. And I don't want to come across as too biased, but I've noticed in at least my own history and in things that I've viewed in the past and kind of the environment in which I grew up that uh, one side typically tends to squash curiosity by claiming to have the answers, and one side seems to kind of be open to looking for new ways to discover information and develop that information. So, Gia, what do you want to take on first?
First, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. For some reason, it connected to my phone. Let's look at. I mean, let's look at the everything from nothing, because that's ontologically that would be the first one, right? Because um you need like an initial creation event for everything else, right? So that's a little more cosmological.
Gotcha.
I-
Yeah. So just kind of like the origin story, if you will. Just where did
Yeah,
everything come from versus an everything from nothing idea? What does everything from nothing mean? These are
yeah,
some of the questions that we typically get asked. These are some of the questions that uh, obviously people that aren't Christian ask Christians to explain. These are things that Christians ask people that aren't Christians to explain. So,
yeah,
if you want to get started on that, I can kind of chip in and we'll go back and forth. And if we have any questions in chat, if you'd like to ask your own, please feel free to do so. I'd love to hear your input there. We'd love to do Q&A. We're also open to call-ins at that number or on our Discord server. So let's go ahead and get started on that, and we'll go
sure.
from there.
Yeah. I think first of all, this um, we need to define terms. Uh, there seems to be an equivocation going on with the word nothing. A lot of times, Christians or religious people or people who I guess don't understand the standard cosmological model, they'll use the word nothing, and physicists will use the word nothing, and but they mean two different things, although they're using the same word. So, like a lot of times when I guess your layman, they'll use the term. They're talking about essentially a zero energy state where there is zero energy, zero mass, zero radiation, nothing that is occupying space, and that is not what your physicists are going to say what nothing is. They're talking about um, quantum states, which in itself has energy.
Gotcha. So just to clarify for the people watching and even for myself, uh, what your in your experience, it seems that oftentimes there's people kind of talking beside each other. They're saying similar things, but they don't actually mean the same thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because when a physicist says nothing, he's talking about the quantum state. He's not talking about zero energy state, which would be I guess your philosophical nothing, your no thing. But nothing in physics means something totally different. Especially with the advent of quantum physics, we now know that empty space has energy.
Gotcha, gotcha. So with that in mind, do you think that is primarily the cause of discord between people that argue everything from nothing versus people that are typically in like the religious circumstances or that kind of grew up in an environment that at least has some sort of deity or creation model.
I'd say for some, this equivocation, this lack of understanding seems to be an issue, but not for all. Because I mean, there's been times I spend a lot of time arguing with people online, and I'll explain this simple concept to them, and they just don't seem to care. So sometimes it's a lack of understanding, like sometimes it's just dishonesty. And to be honest with you, even some of the physicists don't really help. I mean, Lawrence Krauss, like one of my favorite thinkers of all time, he has a book that is titled "A Universe from Nothing," and so um, maybe make it a little more obvious of what you're talking about. I mean, it's not his fault that people um, just look at the cover of the book and then make a bunch of broad assumptions about his theory. But
Right, but at the same time, there is obviously some burden to be placed on the author to kind of express themselves in a way in which everyone can understand it.
yeah, really.
Yeah, so it seems to me something I've heard quite a bit is that the argument is obviously if there is no God, where did everything come from? And
Yeah.
that being the big question, um, no matter kind of what religion you come from, if there is no creator, or if there is no, I'll use the other word designer. That's something that I've heard a lot in my arguments. Then how could everything come from nothing? And I think in and of itself, that's a bit of a nomenclature, or it's just an incorrect style of argument. Um,
Yeah, it's just a fallacy. I mean, you're putting the onus on the wrong person. You know, I mean, this essentially is the if you go in a mansion and you find a body. You know, if it wasn't the butler, then who was it?
right,
You know,
right. I mean, you're asking kind of a leading question by saying uh, there has to be given that there's this quote unquote creation, then there must be a creator.
yeah,
Kind of placing emphasis on the fact that there is a creation versus like if you were to say there is a universe, then there must be a universor. It doesn't
right.
quite come across the same way, right?
Yeah, if there's a law, there must be a lawgiver. I mean, and that's another one of those issues where we're running into an equivocation because a lot of times when people who make that argument, they're talking about prescriptive laws, right? A
Right.
law that sort of government would create to that says this type of behavior is acceptable. And that's not what a scientific law is. It's descriptive. It's saying, here's a thing that we observe and it always happened, therefore it's a law. You know, just like you talk about, I forget which law of thermodynamics it is, but when it talks about a closed system, a closed system that its amount of usable energy will decrease, right? And so that's a descriptive law. There's there's no there's no need for any sort of governing body to tell the atoms how to behave. This is just an observable fact of the universe. So it's descriptive versus prescriptive laws.
Right. So what you're saying there essentially is that when scientists typically refer to a law, they're talking about something that's just been observed in regular occurrence.
Yeah,
Whereas when the typical person may refer to law, they may refer to something that has been described, such as the laws of the land. Like when you pull up to a stop sign, you need to come to a full stop. That describes the law
yeah,
you're doing.
yeah,
But
and
with
it's
a
yeah,
law, it's not something that there was no indicator there naturally occurring that people just stopped at. Like that just like we put this law into place, therefore people needed to observe this law.
exactly.
Right. So,
Hey,
how would you say that these two kind of correlate? Everything from nothing and prescribed versus described laws.
well, well, I'll say that I mean they correlate in the fact that they're both coming from a fallacious reasoning, like that they're. I mean, it's just an equivocation of both. I mean, the way to really fix this is really through education and honest, and obviously you need um, an honest interlocutor as well. The like I said, some of the times I spend arguing with people online, I'll explain a basic concept to them, and it seems like they're being intentionally obtuse, and so that's uh, one issue that have to be fixed first. You know, you have to actually be trying to understand the other person.
Right, and I definitely agree with that. And I've noticed that in some of my chats, not all of them, but it seems that occasionally when arguing with people, I won't say most of the time because I can't recall that correctly or necessarily, but there have been times when I've been having a discussion with someone about this topic, and it seems that there's almost a dishonesty going into the conversation because there's no genuine
And
willingness to truth. It's kind of like I have this answer that was given to me, and I'm going to stick with it no matter what you say. Is that
hey,
fair?
Fasad, one thing, somebody just informed me your audio is very low on Twitch.
I can change that. It's a little loud on my headphones. I can update that, but I appreciate you telling me. You can let me know if this is better. I know there's about a 5 second delay, but I'll turn this up. So if that's better, just let me know. If it's too loud, just let me know. I can adjust it accordingly. And then if there's anyone watching, I see there's a couple of viewers. Please say hello in chat. That way we know you're here. You don't have to ask
Well,
anything or
call
request
in.
anything.
Call in, man.
Yeah, feel free to give us a call in as well. I mean, we can do Q&A and chat. We're more than welcome to do that as well. But we'd also,
Tell us why we're wrong.
yeah, I mean that's kind of the point is we want to know if we're wrong. We want to know why, and I think that's something that both Gio and I have kind of debated internally. It's something that we've both debated externally, almost ad infinitum with each other, and with as many people as are willing to entertain us as possible. So that's kind of where we're starting this podcast esque style Twitch to stream, because we want people to not only view and watch and kind of see what we have to say, but we also want to get people's opinion. We genuinely want people to call in or to ask questions that they may have themselves. And if you call in, you don't have to give your real name. You don't have to, kind of out yourself or anything like that as far as what you believe or anything like that. It's more of just being honest with questions and asking honest questions. And if you have a genuine opinion of why things that we may talk about in this are wrong, then we want to know that as well. And we want to be able to address those things. And we may take that and introspectively look back at those things and say, yeah, we need to address this issue, at least in our own lives, right? So, with that in mind, we can continue on to everything from nothing in a few minutes if we'd like. I actually want to take on one of these other topics as well. And
Let's do it.
personally, I want to take on the last one, and I know it seems a little biased, at least in and of itself. I'm aware of
Yeah.
that. I don't want it to be. I don't want this stream. I don't want this argument. I don't want this debate to be biased in any way, shape, or form. Although Geo and I typically agree on a lot of what we talk about, we know a lot of people that disagree with what we have to say. We know a lot of people that may not always agree with what we have to say. We know people that are adamantly against some of the things that we have to say. But as I allowed him to take on the first one, the one that I want to take on is the last one being probably the most personal to me. It's something that I've experienced the most. It's something that I see the most often, and that's squashing curiosity versus constantly seeking better understanding. And I'll speak a little bit on the personal side of things and kind of give where I'm coming from, but also something that I've observed many times throughout my debates with Christians and with people, Muslims. I've debated with Hindus. I've atheists. Doesn't matter what your religion is. Doesn't matter what your understanding is. You come across when you say that you have all the answers that or you have a very specific answer that cannot be changed no matter what
Or you
is
have a
presented,
very specific answer that cannot be
it comes
changed.
with a problem. And that problem is that you start squashing curiosity. And I think that is one of the most detrimental things to children and to people as humans is that we want to be able to be curious. We want to seek out other things. We want to seek out truth. We want to find the answers for ourselves. And you'll notice this in smaller children, but even in adults, or like sometimes you joke around with people like ADD, that they're just constantly seeking some sort of stimulus. Well, that stimulus is curiosity. And I feel like the scientific community, at least, is constantly seeking better understanding, and it's where Geo said it best earlier is that if you think we're wrong, we want to know it, and we want to know why. Whereas a lot of times in the conversations that we've had, people on the side of religion typically say, "I know the answer, and there's no changing my mind on this." Now, as far as Geo goes, I'm not going to speak for him, but at least as what I've seen this over and over again, where it's I have all the answers, therefore there's no need to look for further answers. Now,
Yeah, I mean that's. I mean that just about sums it up. You know, me even like before we had a good understanding of how weather worked or uh, how lightning worked. You know, we just stick a God right there, and so it's now we say, oh, it was Thor, right? And so now we know how lightning works. It's Thor, so there's no need to investigate it any further, right? So we got it all figured out. I mean, and that's what it sounded like to me. You were saying about squashing curiosity. There's no reason to be curious anymore because we have an answer.
Yeah, and
Is it
that
true?
can kind of
Well,
lead
no.
that can kind of lead into pretty much every other question here on the list, and it's something that it's genuinely saddening because it says like people used to believe that that there was a deity in charge of the seas. Neptune was the god of the seas to the Romans, and he would anytime there was this big storm, you must have angered the gods. And
Yeah.
in like Norse mythology, you have like Thor, the god of thunder, and he was in control of like the lightning and thunder of the skies, and he was the answer to the questions of what we now call science of what happens when you have a cold front meeting a warm front that causes this giant water spout on the water, or a hurricane on land, or whatever you want to call it. These natural occurring phenomenons, or what happens when tectonic plates shift under the ocean. Well, it causes things like tsunamis. It's not some mysterious deity that we aren't aware of, or some god that we may have angered. It's quite literally just the shifting of tectonic plates. And as science has come along and we've started to answer these questions, you start to see the dissipation of some of these older gods of the Romans and of the Greeks, and even of like ancient Chinese culture that still had things like sky worshippers and whatnot. That anything that could, happen naturally that the science hadn't really accounted for yet, we would just insert a deity in the place. And by doing so, I feel like you've just squashed curiosity, because if your whole life you go into this and you say, oh, well, there's really no need to study the oceans and the ocean floor because some deity is controlling it, then you've really squashed the curiosity of that person, or that oceanographer, or even that geologist that's going to study these things and maybe come up with some better viewpoint onto what's actually happening. And I think that's what science in and of itself, or at least it should be, striving to do.
Yeah, you really shouldn't be afraid to just admit when you don't know. I mean,
And that's
that's where it
a
starts.
really, really good point. And that's something that I find, at least in personal experience, that people sometimes have trouble with saying that's okay. And that's
Yeah,
like saying that I don't know. And
yeah,
honestly, that's a really good answer. And I
mm,
think people would disagree with that that's not a good answer. I don't know is not a good answer. But I would say, on the contrary, I don't
yeah.
know is a very good answer.
But if I mean, if you don't know, the only honest, the only modest, the only reasonable answer is I don't know. Right? It's not God, it's not magic or whatever. If you don't know, then the answer ought to be you don't know. You know, um, regardless of whether you consider it a good answer or not. It's just a recognition of the reality of your ignorance in a certain area. And I mean, the good part about it is, I mean, that's where knowledge begins. Is where when you it's the admission that you don't know, because once you admit that you don't know, now you're giving yourself permission to go and investigate, and then you can go and find out.
Right,
Right?
and I would say that that's oftentimes where that squashing of curiosity comes in, is because I feel like in most religions, or at least most of the people that I talk to that have some form of religion, it's not okay to say I don't know. And I just so strongly disagree with that. I have there's an irking inside of me that says it's not a problem to say that you don't know. It's not an issue to say that you don't have an answer. That's okay. It's a good thing. And we want to be able to say I don't know, because then we can look for future answers, and we can look for answers to these problems that we have, or these questions that we have. Whereas if we just insert God, or insert anything there, and I think that's the big thing, is that you can literally insert anything capable of solving the problem in that spot. And that's what a lot of people end up doing with their religion. So for Christians, obviously they say God, and for Muslims they'll say it's Allah, and for ancient Norse they may say Thor, and for ancient Romans they might say Neptune, or the Greeks may say Poseidon, or etc. You just kind of insert this deity, or you insert this bridging of gaps without actually doing any research, without actually doing input or work into solving this problem. And doing so is just, I feel it's so detrimental to humans and to human development because it stunts critical thinking. And that's where one of my biggest problems with religion, and certain religions at least, lie, is that it can genuinely stunt critical thinking, which can kind of delve into other spots of your life. If you're not critically thinking about things, then you're not really thinking about things, and you know that in and of itself I can consider an issue. And so that's kind of why I included this as part of the topics, and it's something that I really wanted to touch on, just like Geo here wants to talk about everything from nothing, because he personally finds it a huge misconception, or this, kind of talking beside each other when it comes to people that are interested in religion versus your typical scientist, what they may mean when they say nothing. So that's something I really wanted to address. And like I said, if anyone in the chat, or if anyone wants to call in and just kind of give their perspective, no matter which side of the fence you may lie on, it's something that we're open to, and it's something that we want to discuss. Otherwise, I think that Gio and I are going to just take on another one of these issues, and we can kind of delve into them as deeply as we need to or want to.
Let's check out the global flood.
Yeah, so obviously here I have global flood with a question mark, and the original topic that I put up is that the Christian God of the Bible, and I was that specific because I wanted people watching that if they were a Christian, that's something they may need to account for. So the
Yeah,
global
I assume
flood is
you were
kind of,
talking about Noah's flood.
yes, that's precisely what I was referring to. In early Genesis, we have an account of a global flood in which Noah and his wife and his children and their wives uh, built an ark, and basically survived on an ark for, estimates say longer than a year, in which a flood covered the mountaintops of the earth. And so a global flood, quite literally, being a flood that covers the entire surface area of land on the earth. And that's something that most scientists would have qualm with, at best. That's probably the kindest way to put it. But there's some issues there that we probably would want to hash out and discuss, and it's something that a lot of Christians specifically would take issue with, and that's the global flood. Um, and I mean, we could look into a little bit of like what the Bible has to say about the flood. We can also look into some of what the most prominent people that proclaim this global flood have to say about it, and just kind of go from there. And if anyone wants to ask a question in chat or send their own comment, that's something that's obviously going to be up on the screen. It's something that people can watch at the end of this. But in the meantime, since both of us are pretty well versed on the topic, we can kind of talk about it and what issues there may be, and why there is this controversy, at least in biblical chat, versus what science would have to say on the side.
Yeah, man. I think that ultimately comes from their loyalty to their religious beliefs, not necessarily any empirical data. I mean, what I could find, there aren't enough water molecules on the planet for a worldwide flood. I mean, that would sound like that would squash it right there. I mean, there's so many other reasons. Yeah, I was talking to one guy online about the flood today, and I saw him. He mentioned in another conversation he was talking about all of these animals that aren't able to live at high altitudes, and it dawned on me why he said that. Because if you think about it, so with the worldwide flood, if it covered everything, like including like the Himalayas, that means everywhere you are, you'd be about I mean, at least about 9,000 feet above sea level, and that's not survivable. Not in any long term. Not for all animals. You
Yeah,
know.
I mean, there's obviously not natural life occurring at the top of the Himalayas, at least animal life. There may be like small plants and whatnot, but there's not anything that naturally lives at the top of the Himalayas. And obviously, the people that have made it to the top of Everest and whatnot, those are few and far between. There've been a lot of lives lost, kind of pursuing that
Yeah.
goal. So
Just think of how much colder it's going to be in uh, just the thinner air. But then again, I don't know what's his name. That huge creationist guy on YouTube, crazy guy. He has the dinosaur park
oh,
down in Alabama.
Ken Ham.
Yeah, no, it's Kent Hovind. Kent
Oh,
Hovind.
Kit Hovind. You're talking about the
Kent
dinosaur.
Ham,
Ken Ham did
yeah,
the Ark
yeah,
experience.
yeah. Ken Ham is like he's a slightly more intelligent version of Kent Hovind, I think. Not by much, but uh, anyway, I mean, he would probably get around this because he has a theory that there was some canopy that was covering the earth that was made of liquid water. And I mean,
Yeah,
don't ask me about the physics of it because how this gravity proof wall of water is able to hover above the earth for so many years, and then for some reason it falls. But uh,
and then
he might
afterwards,
say,
what would happen
yeah,
after it fell?
yeah,
Where would it go?
right. But he believed that the canopy was like giving, I guess, was purifying the air and just made it, um, I guess, the entire planet like a more temperate environment. So I mean that's one way you could get around that. I don't think the high altitude um, argument is not the strongest. But I mean, I think it's a good point that he made that I had never thought of before until he mentioned it. And
Yeah,
he even had a list of animals that definitely couldn't survive, at high altitudes. And I wish I had copied the list.
yeah,
But
and then obviously there would be the other side of things in which you have the like freshwater sea creatures. Like what happens when there's
when it's mixing with salt,
yeah, given that all of it's going to kind of be together, if you will. And
yep,
even though we know that like where two oceans meet, they don't actually combine. We do know that when you add fresh water to salt water, and there's an abundant supply of salt water, that you turn fresh water into salt water with slightly less salinity.
yeah, because there's a lot more salt water than there is fresh water.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
all the
that
oceans are.
takes about if the Earth is 73 give or take percent covered in water, 72% of that is salt water. Like
Yeah,
1% is fresh drinkable water that we are using and utilizing, and we have come up with things like desalinators to get rid of salt in water, but in and of itself, there's still a giant portion of salt water compared to like fresh water. So these freshwater animals, these freshwater fish and things that lived in rivers and streams and lakes, where do they go? How do they survive if everything's now covered in water? And if you say, oh, well, it was freshwater, then the question kind of turns into the opposite of what about all the saltwater creatures? Because if you covered the highest mountain peak with water and it was all freshwater, then you'd have a far greater amount of freshwater than saltwater, and there are animals that can literally only survive in saltwater environments. So you kind of have a dual edged sword there, no matter how you want to slice it.
yeah. I
And
mean,
then obviously there's when you mentioned Kent Hovind, there's the other proponent of this. So Ken Ham, who I've mentioned, has
art.
the Ark Encounter, which is all
Yeah,
about Noah's flood and the global flood that we're talking about, and it's something that I've seen a few atheists take on YouTube. I've seen a few Christians go through and kind of walk through and explain their viewpoints on that as well, and it's just kind of something to behold, if you will, in that
I
Ken
mean,
Ham
I
not
think it makes a mock of science, in my opinion.
yeah, and I think that's where a lot of educators and a lot of scientists have the biggest issue with it is that it's mocking science, not in and of itself the issue with the building or even his preaching, but the the rampant just throwing out science is just out the window. It's
Yeah.
saying that humans and dinosaurs live side by side. It's
Right.
saying that that we could fit pretty much two of every species of animal on an ark, or even if you go with a mega species, or a family heritage of species.
I think about what what was Noah feeding that Brachiosaurus,
Yeah, I
you know?
mean, there's animals that in the
Jeez.
past, like, what about some of the, like things like Tyrannosaurus Rex, where it can,
Yeah, right. You
eat,
gotta feed that thing.
yeah, it can eat, the weight of an elephant in a period of a couple weeks. Like,
Yeah.
how are you keeping these things fed? Even if you only have, two of them, and all the other dinosaurs came from them somehow, without using that crazy word up there that people like to throw out the window with religion, and that's evolution. So Ken Ham actually kind of has a very interesting perspective on that, as he says that there's almost a version of like hyper evolution after the flood. So if you go and were to tour the Ark Encounter, you see where he says there's approximately, on the lowest side, about 7,000 types of animals on the Ark.
Ah, okay. So is he trying to say that to, I guess, reduce the amount of animals that you'd have to fit on the ark?
Yeah,
Is
so
that
from everything
purpose?
I've seen, and I've actually seen virtual walkthroughs of the Ark Encounter, and I've been on Ken Ham's website. He has a creation museum. He has the Ark Encounter. I've done some research into it, and it seems that he wants to reduce the number of animals on the Ark to as low number as possible to make them all fit. He
Ah,
also then wants to say there's some sort of, and he wouldn't use the term hyper evolution, but it's kind of what you have to. He says there's a rapid speciation that would have to take place after the ark in order to get to the number of like dogs we have, because he would say there was only two dogs on the ark. There wasn't one of every kind of dog,
mhm.
or every species, or genus of dog. There was two dogs, which could have led to everything from like dire wolves to like think things as small as like teacup poodles. So, you have dogs that weigh several hundred pounds, like bull mastiffs, and dogs that only weigh a couple pounds at most, like poodles. They all were on the ark in the form of one giant subspecies of dog called dog.
Really? So, I mean, it was interesting because I mean, I just looked up how many monkeys there are, how many different species of monkeys there are, right? And so, I guess so there was just a pair of monkeys on an ark, and then after 6,000 years, they hyper evolved into 140 to 174 different species on
Yeah,
various different
actually, you'd have to
continents.
narrow that down, because we would say that the flood occurred approximately 800
Oh
years
yeah,
after the creation of Earth, so about
right.
5,200 years, in which you'd have to have two monkeys evolve or hyper speciate into the 172 different species of monkeys that we know. And
On two
honestly,
different continents, the New World, and well, actually on four different continents, but on new you have the New World apes or New World monkeys and New World primates and South America. Then you have the Old World in Africa and Asia, right? And so,
yeah, and honestly, that's quite a conservative animal to choose, because if you were to look into things like beetles,
all right, birds,
they're
honestly,
they're the
yeah.
most abundant species on the planet.
9,000 types of birds. So
Yeah,
that's there was one bird on the ark,
yeah. There's
and
two
then from
birds on
that
the ark, a male and
you get
female, and then
it
uh,
turns into chickens, ostriches, and bald eagles
yeah, all at the
and
same time. So you have giant predator birds, you have
penguins.
giant flightless birds, you also have the very famous outlier, the penguin, that also
Yeah,
has
right.
to come into this somewhere. So you have
Yeah.
everything from, chickens that we have now domesticated and whatnot, to predatory birds like Maltese falcons and whatnot, to giant flightless birds like the ostrich and the emu that exist only on one continent, which is a little strange, but um, and then you
Mhm.
also have penguins, which don't act like any other bird. So we kind of have this odd. like
Well,
diversity
fortunately,
here.
the
Like,
penguin.
where did it come from, and how did they get there? We don't have any trails leading things like kangaroos and emus to
But
Australia. They just
I
don't
was gonna say,
exist.
fortunately, that penguin, he's suitable for very cold climates, which you would have had during the flood if it
It's
was
true, you would have,
flood
because
if
if
the
you're
ark is sitting 9,000 feet above sea level.
yeah, at that elevation, you have lower oxygen. You have
Right.
much colder
So,
environment. So fortunately, the
so
penguin
maybe Noah had a few penguins. Maybe
yeah,
Noah had a
and
couple
there's
penguins.
mass speciation after the flood. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's seems like that's kind of what we would have had to do if that's the route we wanted to take. But Ken Ham actually has such a unique viewpoint on it, and his Ark Encounter and his Creation Museum actually hold to this, and it's something that like nowhere else that I've seen, at least in Christian culture and whatnot, holds to, which is pretty fascinating because you on the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum, you have dinosaurs mentioned specifically by name on the Ark,
Hmm.
whereas on the at least as far as I can tell biblically, there's not really much mentioned other than there's clean animals and unclean animals, and then we have a very select few animals mentioned by name, like we have a dove and we have a raven mentioned. But it seems kind of strange to me. Like Ken Ham is just he's put so much time and effort and to saying like these specific animals had to be on the ark or were on the ark, and a lot of people have asked him where he gets this information or where he's coming up with this, and he just doesn't seem to have a good answer, at least as far as I can tell, as to
Well, that's the
what he
Bible.
means.
That's not the Bible. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's where like this debate could kind of divulge into individual viewpoints on were dinosaurs on the ark or whatnot. That's something that if you're not strictly arguing the Bible, you're going to have a really hard time defending. But if you have a viewpoint on that, I'd like to know kind of what it is and where you got it from, because
Yeah, I mean, another thing you would really expect from a worldwide flood is if you wouldn't expect the fossil layers to be so ordered, right? Like you'd expect to see a trilobite, uh, a raptor, and a rabbit, all in the same layer, right?
right,
And
and that's where the
that's never found.
obviously animal creation versus evolution kind of comes into play, is because evolution says that this process took millions of years, whereas like animal creation and the literal 6 day creation mentioned in Genesis may say like it took 6 literal days. And I've seen obviously arguments of where it's like more of a figurative time, but a lot of times there's still issues when taking either side of that argument.
Yeah, there was this passage in there, and I think it's in Genesis, and it says the Lord sent the wind upon the earth, and then the flood waters went away. You familiar with that?
Yeah, I am familiar. I don't know the exact passage, but I am familiar that the passage in which you speak, you say it basically says that a wind descended upon the earth, and it's essentially it drove the waters out.
Yeah. Let me. It's in Genesis 8. It's Genesis 8. Uh,
Sorry if you hear me typing
yeah,
here.
Genesis 8. Yeah, Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. It says, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and He sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded." If you're listening and um, you believe this, please call in and explain to me what that means.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's something that I would definitely take issue with. There's obviously a lot of verses specifically in the Bible, a lot of them in Genesis alone that we could take issue with. But given that global flood is kind of the topic right now, this is one of those things that is just really, really ambiguous or hard to explain. So if you have a good viewpoint on this, it's something that we want to hear about, because there are other biblical topics in which we could take on and that we may take on in the future, with guest speakers and whatnot, that
You know, I had thought about, so you know when like one of the arguments that I think it was Ken Ham made um, on his website, because when people brought up like how the water would be have to be able to cover all the mountains, and he argues that those the mountains, they didn't come about through a slow process of the tectonic plates pushing against each other. He says this happened quickly, but it was after the flood. Before the flood, the earth was much flatter,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
obviously, there's even
But
some verses in the Bible that would almost lead you to believe that the Earth is flat.
but I was looking over this, and it uh, I had it just dawned on me when it talks about the ark resting in on Mount Ararat. I mean, so the Bible itself disproves Ken Ham's theory on that, on about the the mountains coming about after the flood.
Yeah, I mean, that in and of itself would pretty much disprove it because obviously we have Mount Sinai mentioned in Exodus, which I know is
Yeah,
after the fact, but
but that's after the flood.
we know mountains existed at least as far as there had to be a record of mountains in order for Mount Ararat to be specifically named.
Yeah,
So in and of itself, that would go to kind of disprove that issue. And then
definitely.
another really big issue that happens and that people kind of overlook with the flood is plant life. And the really obvious kind of point out that I give is that if you cover a plant completely in water for any length of time, you're going to drown it. And if you
Yeah.
don't think that's true, just if you have a bathtub or a sink at home, just get you a potted plant, cover it up with water for a day or two, and then try to dry it out and get it back to life. You're just not going to have much success. It just doesn't work. Versus if we say that quite literally everything was covered, even the tops of the trees were covered, because obviously, if it covers the tallest mountain range in existence, it's going to cover the trees that are way below that at sea level. Um, you're going to kill all of the plants everywhere.
Yeah.
You also have to remember how many species of plants there are, and the
Yeah.
speciation and cross pollination and crossbreeding of in natural plants to exist to bring back to where we are today.
And think of all the animals that are dependent, on them for food,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
so even if we took the most conservative of estimates for the number of animals that were on the ark itself, and we said this is the number, and Noah had sufficient food on the ark, once the waters receded, if it happened relatively quickly, when they got off the ark, there would be no plant life alive for them to eat.
You're right.
So,
And
what are they eating once they get
that,
off the
that
ark?
zebra, that zebra who eats the grass, once you stop feeding that lion because it's off the ark,
Yeah,
goodbye zebra, right?
it just seems to lead to more issues than solutions, if you will. And it's something that I think is one of the biggest contested point here, or one of the biggest contested points here in the scientific versus religious community, especially the Christians that believe in either young Earth creation or at least a global flood. You don't have to necessarily believe in young Earth creation to believe a global flood, and vice versa. But if you do believe that a global flood took place, specifically the Noah flood mentioned in Genesis, then there's some answers there, and there's questions that we have that we want you to provide the answer to. If you have answers to these questions, please let us know. Because otherwise, it seems to me like you're being really dishonest and disingenuous if it's something that you continue to hold belief in and you're not willing or unable to provide answers to these questions. And it's not the purpose of the whole this whole chat isn't to make you give up your religion or to do whatever. It's to genuinely ask these questions and see if there are answers that I or Geo may have overlooked, and to kind of poke holes into some of the beliefs that people have that may have beliefs different than our own. And this won't be specifically a religious stream. It won't be anti-religion, and in the future we're going to take on other topics that have nothing to do with religion. We're going to take on current events and topics of today and philosophy and pretty much anything that we can debate that people want to debate. We have on our about page on Twitch. We have the option for you to send in suggestions. We also have the same thing in our Discord server. So we're open to talking pretty much about anything that we can. With that in mind, religion is going to be one of those topics, and this one just happens to be religious. But in the future, we are going to take on other topics, and we are going to, do other things, and we are going to discuss other things. But in the meantime, since we're talking religion, if you're holding to a religion that has belief in any of these things, and you personally believe in a global flood, or you believe creation versus evolution, or you have questions about everything from nothing, or whether we're, things like naturally occurring events versus miracles, or if you feel like you can provide me specifically, or even Geo, I'm sure he'd be interested into some reasoning behind the squashing curiosity versus better understanding. We want to know it. The whole point is that he and I, we've known each other a very long time, and we're very familiar with how each other think, but we're also very curious creatures, and we want to know things that we don't know, and we want to know how to either better ourselves, better our arguments, or find flaws in our own. And so when he and I talk, and when we get on this and we debate, it's not to squash anything that you believe or just disregard it. But if you sit back and you're listening and you watch this and you say, actually, you have some good questions, like, how do I account for things like a global flood? Maybe it's time to take a step back and ask yourself these questions on a personal level. So that's just kind of my 2 cents there, and I'll let Geo kind of take over, and we'll go into something else if you'd like.
Uh, I think we kind of exhausted the global flood. We're coming up on the end here, but let's try to get to at least one more of these: naturally occurring versus supernatural / miraculous.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Obviously, the creation versus evolution kind of falls under the everything from nothing and global flood worldview. So we'll take on the naturally occurring versus supernatural, and unless we get some people calling in here
Yeah,
last couple minutes or whatnot, or a bunch of questions in chat, we'll probably just end it after that, and go from there. And then in the future, we're hoping to have guest speakers that have opposing positions to ours. We're also hoping to get people that are viewing to ask questions and actual call-ins. That way we can kind of extend this and get both sides of it without just kind of talking over both sides ourselves. So what would you like to start with on that one?
so supernatural, supernatural / miraculous. I think for one, it's just a failure to define the term. And also, you run into some huge epistemic issues here. So, like, let's say you see a phenomenon, right? You observe some phenomenon of which you don't know the cause. How did you determine that it's supernatural? How did you determine it's miraculous? Like, how did you determine that there's not a natural explanation for this?
Right,
No,
and
for
to
for
expand upon that, the question kind of broadens. It's not even specific to like Christianity or religion in general. Is to basically anyone that believes in ghosts, or anyone that believes, in the things that can't be naturally explained, or things that, like miracles, people that believe in miracles, which is why I put supernatural / or backslash miraculous, because if you believe in miracles or you believe in ghosts, to me it seems there's a disconnect between something that you can't explain and something that you're assigning this term to, or assigning this value to. Is that kind
yeah,
of what you've seen?
definitely, man. We've seen it to more, I guess, uh, more terrestrial things in the past. Like lightning, even the way children are born, either will say, "Oh, that was a miracle because we didn't understand the process of sexual reproduction." But like now, it's most often seen. I see it in when people appeal to the cosmos. I was listening to this debate that Matt Dillahunty had. Um, I forget the person who was debating, but the guy was saying that the that black holes are supernatural because of what they do, and so others, I don't know if you understand how black holes work, and while once you pass the event horizon, you can't avoid the singularity, and it's not because the gravity from the singularity is so point. It's because the warp in space time is so extreme that space and time switch places, and so it's not a space. Black holes aren't spatial singularities; they're time singularities. So the singularity becomes an inevitable event in the future, and that's perfectly explained through Einstein's field equations. There's nothing miraculous about it, but we, because we don't have some complete understanding of this. He was saying, "Oh, this must be supernatural just because of how powerful it is," and
Right. So, and to further that, just to kind of expand upon it, and maybe I'll even ask you a question myself, is to say that you mentioned earlier things like childbirth or things like lightning, and that's kind of where I was referring earlier to people basically inserting a god of the gaps, and that's kind of the fallacy that people typically refer to, the god of the gaps fallacy. When there's something or this lack of information that people have, are you saying that this is equivocating to supernatural and miraculous events as well, such as ghost and things like saying black holes are supernatural? Is that an
I
equivocation?
did that definitely. It's that's exactly what it is. It's a supernaturalism of the gaps. Like here's this phenomenon that we observe, of which we have no explanation. Supernatural. I mean, uh, there's no empirical basis for that. And I mean, and I don't even like as far as I was talking about the epistemic issues. Like I don't even know how you could even determine that there is no naturally occurring uh, um, explanation for this because that's not even what science does. It can't say it doesn't. Science isn't in the field of um, proving proving that correlations don't happen. Like the best that science could do is said from what we see, there is no data showing any correlation, right? So there might not be any data showing that there is no naturally occurring explanation that we know of, right? That doesn't mean that there isn't a natural occurring explanation.
Right. So basically, what you're saying by that is that just because there's not currently an answer, or not currently a prevailing theory on this, doesn't mean there won't be in the future, or doesn't mean that there isn't some natural way to describe what's going on.
Yeah, I don't even see how they could using a scientific method. I don't even see how they could make the assertion that there is no natural explanation for it. You'd have to prove that, and I don't know how that could be proven because you're not in science anymore. We're talking about a different topic.
Gotcha. And just before we wrap up, I want to kind of expand into this a little more. So think things like supernatural occurrences. I want to take on. I'll take on ghost, and I'll take on the word miracles specifically before we wrap up. And I think you kind of started us out with, and it's going to have the same kind of topic and viewpoint no matter where we take it or what we view on it, because it all kind of falls under the same wheelhouse, which is why I included it here. But things like Ghost, I know a lot of people that say they believe in Ghost, whether they're religious or not doesn't really matter. When I ask people do they believe in Ghost, a lot of times if they say yes, I'm just kind of kind of want to see why people believe in ghosts, and I haven't really gotten much of a good answer, but to kind of reiterate what you were saying about supernatural occurrences or supernatural events or like even miracles, a lot of times that people that believe in ghosts typically say like they've seen something or they felt something that they couldn't explain. And I typically hold issue with that because what makes people say that's a ghost? Or what makes people say that that's, you know, an angel or a demon or a spirit or a being or even something like Neptune or Thor or God or insert whatever you'd like here. The question is what drives people to that, and does it just straight lead back to a gaps fallacy? Is that what's going on?
I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. Because uh, a lot of times, most of the times when I hear that brought up, they say, "Oh, it's just a ghost or it's supernatural," and I ask, "Well, how do you know?" And the response is something not so different from, "Well, what else could it have been?"
Mm.
You know?
Yeah, so like I don't have a better explanation, so therefore it must have been a ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Sense.
I've seen that a lot, and that just kind of leads back to the gaps of information fallacy, and that's something that you'll see kind of as an overwhelming viewpoint that kind of takes on every one of these issues more times than not, is that there's a lack of information that a lot of times people that believe things like this insert some sort of deity or supernatural answer or miracle into its place to kind of fill in for those gaps. And that's just something I've seen and noticed in personal experience when I discuss these issues with people in person. When I've talked to people that I know that hold some of these viewpoints, it seems that I feel this way, therefore God. I can't explain how this happened, therefore miracle. And we just kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit and kind of get this out here, because if anyone watches and they want to come and comment something that we'll mention here at the end here, but I'll mention it now just because we're about to wrap up, is that this is going to be uploaded to YouTube when it's all said and done. So if you didn't feel comfortable calling in, at least give us a comment on YouTube. We can respond and answer questions there. But if you can take on some of these things or take on some of these questions, or if you want to insert or give your 2 cents there, um, behind the wall of YouTube and the comment section there, it's something we're willing to address there as well. But it seems to me that pretty much anyone I've talked to that holds these beliefs, whether it's ghosts or miracles or whatever, is essentially it's just a lack of information. And I don't mean that in a mean spirited way. I mean that in a literal way. That there's information that person is lacking that causes them to insert their own theory on what it could have been.
Yeah. Um, I don't disagree with anything you said. That's essentially. I mean, and also think about just the cognitive dissonance of that, right? Because I go back to what I was saying when the the typical response I get is, "Well, what else it could have been?" or "I can't think of anything else," or right. Um, if you don't know what it is, right? If you're admitting to yourself that you don't know what the cause of this is, then how, in the name of common sense, could you claim that it's supernatural?
Right. I mean, the point there being that you can basically insert any answer that you can't explain with that same philosophy or same concept at least.
Yeah, and you can really insert it with anything. I honestly, I don't see why I couldn't just say it's it's physics, right? I mean, I'm not saying that you should. I mean, ultimately, you should withhold judgment until there's sufficient data to draw a conclusion from. But I mean, when you see a ghost, I mean, I don't see why you couldn't say, "Oh, it's just uh, a large collection of neutrinos that work together, and neutrinos hardly interact with normal matter. So that's what you saw. It was total physical phenomenon. That's explained through the standard model of particle physics. You know, I don't see why you couldn't do that. I mean, and
Yeah.
you would at least have some sort of empirical basis, right? Because we at least know neutrinos exist, right?
Right,
And
right.
so,
And I think that kind of just ties back into some of the other things that we've talked about, which is kind of why we tackle all these, and we didn't even have to do them in a specific order, but you'll notice that we kind of kept coming back to like certain themes and certain kind of arguments that you have here. That being that, like, no matter which of these that we're talking about or which one we want to take on, sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know. And that's something we talked about earlier. And giving that answer of I don't know is oftentimes better than trying to assert or insert your own viewpoint or solution to this problem because it may lead you to an incorrect result.
I agree, definitely.
All right, well, I hadn't had any calls come in that I can tell, and if I did, I apologize for missing them. You would have gotten a voicemail, and you can leave one there, but this is going to get uploaded to YouTube when it's all said and done. And I'm going to transition this to our just little thanks for viewing page. This currently has an up count of followers. If you were to subscribe right now, or if you were to follow us, it doesn't cost you anything. It will change on the screen accordingly as we're doing this live. Our images were royalty free. They're found on unsplash.com. Our music is royalty free. The music that we're playing at the beginning was just brought through YouTube Studio. Um, and just wanted to kind of thank you all. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us either here on Twitch, on our YouTube channel where we upload things. The link is right in the comments, or our website, which is nowthat'sdebatable.com. If you had any questions or concerns that you didn't get to ask, didn't get to chat, didn't feel comfortable doing so, feel free to reach out. Did you want to add anything to that? Have any questions or anything that you wanted to tackle before we left?
No, there's also going to be a Facebook page. It's already created, but I mean, there's hardly anything on it. Blame me for that. But it'll be up and running this week. You can there'll be a link to the show on the page. You can also I'll be posting the videos from YouTube on that Facebook page. Feel free to comment, like, and share. Um, and if you have a question, post it on the page. We'll address it on
Yeah, we're
the
also open to topic suggestions. Feel free to do that on our YouTube page. There's also like all sorts of our links on our website and whatnot. They're pretty barren because this is literally the first show we've ever done.
Yep.
So we have a lot of work to do and a lot of effort to put into it. There's a lot of effort that's gone into it so far. But we also have some potential volunteers to actually debate the other side with us. We also have some guest speakers that want to talk about specific topics that we're going to cover that are not necessarily religion, but that just basically things that we can debate. And we're open to suggestions on the Twitch page itself as well. So with the Facebook page, we also have a Twitter account, a YouTube page, an Instagram. Just kind of the works, kind of get that out of the way. The email is now that's debatable stream at Gmail. If you want to send an email there, we're monitoring that. We monitor the website. You can send us messages directly through that. The Facebook page, both of us will be a part of that. Just kind of getting everything off the ground. If you have suggestions, recommendations, questions, basically anything, we're open to the feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else?
Nope. I think that covers it. We don't have a date scheduled for the next episode yet. I mean, but I say at minimum it probably be like next Wednesday, same time. But I'd like to try to do another one even sooner than that.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know what your
we could
schedule
potentially do a
is.
follow up depending on how much feedback we get and whatnot. That's something that we're literally going to iron out all the details kind of on the fly with.
Yeah,
But we also could potentially get a schedule working if this works for both of us, or we can get some guest speakers on that this time works for them as well. It's something that we definitely have to be flexible with. So we appreciate those that did watch and those that viewed and those that came by and those that comment, whatever. We really do appreciate it because we know it's not the best time for everyone, and it's something that we have to be flexible with each other, and our speakers we have to be flexible with and whatnot. So it's something that we're still working on. It's something we're ironing out. But we do appreciate the patience and the time that you did put into it with us. And again, open to feedback where we can get it.
Yep.
All right, well, I'm going to end the stream here, and feel free to follow the YouTube link on the page. I'm going to get it uploaded as soon as possible there. It may take a little while just based on the internet speed and how long the video is. Feel free to comment and whatnot there. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. Please stay curious and feel free to ask us questions. We'll see you next time on Now That's Debatable.